Welcome to Firstline, I'm Daniel Pizarro. On Saturday, major protests will be held across Australia by pro-Palestinian groups following the Israeli government resuming attacks in the Gaza Strip, despite a ceasefire officially in place. Over 500 people have been killed this week in airstrikes, though the Israeli government insists they're not going after Palestinians, but Hamas militants. Joining me from Perth is Nick Everett, the chairperson of Friends of Palestine in Western Australia. Mr. Everett, thank you very much for joining me today.
You're welcome, Daniel. Pleased to be here.
I know that what we have been seeing over the past couple of days, and of course going back many years, is just appalling with what we know. And given the fact that we thought that we at least had a bit of peace, we had that lull during fighting with this ceasefire, and now to see the Israeli government going after Hamas in Gaza, despite this ceasefire being in place, and we're seeing more bodies, more Palestinians are being killed. From someone from your perspective, this must be an absolute travesty of what's going on.
It is, absolutely. You said in the introduction that the Israeli government has claimed that it's not going after civilians but after Hamas. But both the evidence on the ground and their own statements below that. In terms of the situation since Tuesday, since Israel unilaterally broke the ceasefire, we've seen 590 or more Palestinians killed. Around a third of those, about 200 are children. And this has been a consistent statistic throughout the Israel's attacks on Gaza, that around a third of the victims are children. And this simply wouldn't be the case if these were targeted attacks. They're indiscriminate attacks aimed at achieving the maximum death and destruction that Israel can possibly achieve. And I'd just add that the comment made on Tuesday by the Israeli Defense Minister indicates this very clearly. Like, he basically said, either you surrender and we relocate you in other countries, or you suffer the total death and destruction. Sorry, not death. He didn't use the term death, but destruction. So, I think the Israeli agenda here is clear, and it's an agenda that has been green-lighted by the Trump administration. And that's why we are in the situation we're currently in.
Do you also think the remaining hostages in the Gaza Strip by Hamas are now at even greater risk? Because we know that this part of the ceasefire was at least to be able to get some of those remaining hostages out. But now that northern Gaza is again under attack by these airstrikes, we also have the risk of these hostages either being accidentally killed by the IDF, or their captors might decide to kill them regardless.
That's all possible. There are really 2 points I'd make. I think firstly that Israel has used the events of October the 9th, 2023 as a pretext for a genocidal campaign against the Palestinians, and it's never been concerned about the welfare of hostages. And we can see that from the fact that some of the hostages were killed by Israel's actions. But secondly, the ceasefire negotiated in January provided a framework for the release of all hostages on the understanding that Israel and Hamas would move from the first to the second phase of this ceasefire, which would require ultimately the withdrawal of all Israeli troops in exchange for the release and freedom of all living hostages and the return of the remains of those who have been killed. So, again, I think the evidence points in the direction that Israel is not concerned either about the welfare of Palestinians or the welfare of their own citizens held hostage in Gaza.
And have you seen the footage of these massive protests that's actually happening in the state of Israel against the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, because he has been now accused of either gross incompetence over the October attacks or deliberately trying to prolong the war to remain in government? And we know that he's also taking pot shots at his own public service, like Shin Bet, who's is regarded as one of these safeguards of democracy. I know one protest has over 40,000 people, and that's Israeli citizens against Benjamin Netanyahu.
Yes, I don't think this is incompetence on Netanyahu's part. In fact, I think he knows exactly what he's been doing and has been doing since the outset. And certainly he sees the prosecution of the war as its continuation is essential to his own political survival. But he's also made a very considered judgment that his right-wing allies, Ben Gvir, who's now rejoined the cabinet, and Basil Smotrich are part of the equation here. These allies and the current Israeli cabinet, as I said, are wholly committed to continuing this war to bring about conditions whereby they can achieve a forcible population transfer of 2 million Palestinians from Gaza. They've said that themselves many times, but I think part of this judgment is also the election of the Trump administration and Trump's own statements, which, while sometimes contradictory, have articulated his desire to see the entire Palestinian population in Gaza forcibly transferred to neighbouring Arab countries.
Given what is happening at the moment, what should the Australian government, in your opinion, be doing? Because we know a lot of it has been more of the diplomatic route, and there's been the calls for the ceasefire, the restraint, all that. But I would certainly gather from your perspective, the Australian government is either not doing enough or is not condemning the actions of the IDF and the Israeli government in Gaza.
Yeah, I'd argue actually that the Australian government's complicit in the genocide in Gaza, which is strong language, but I think both their statements and their actions suggest this. In terms of the statements, we've seen the Australian government argue for some time that there should be a ceasefire, but then at the same time, they've argued that there should be restraint on both sides and that the war has been a product of Hamas's own actions. We're now 16 months on from October 9, 2024, and I don't accept the argument that Hamas has in any way provoked the current onslaught. The current onslaught is directly the result of Israel's unilateral decision to end a ceasefire. The Australian government should say so. It should condemn Israel's actions, and it should call for the Israeli government to immediately withdraw all troops from Gaza. And I said before that I think the Australian government is also complicit by its actions, and there are a number of examples here. The Australian government entered a defence contract with Elbit Systems, Israel's largest weapons manufacturer, in January last year. It's worth $917 million. The Australian government's provided export licences to enable parts to be used in F-35 fighter jets, some of which are being used in Gaza presently. These are not just any aircraft parts, they're actually the mechanism to drop bombs. This is complicity. The Australian government has also appointed an envoy, an anti-Semitism envoy, who's a well-known defender of Israel and who repeatedly argues that Palestine protests are anti-Semitic simply by their criticisms of Israel. So, by being effectively a de facto minister for the Albanese government, this reflects the Albanese government's position. Our calls are in no way anti-Semitic. Our calls are for the Australian government to take material action to prevent this genocide. It should end all military ties with Israel. It should present its case strongly in all diplomatic forums that Israel should cease and desist from this war. It should be prepared to break diplomatic ties with Israel, and it should be prepared to implement trade sanctions, and importantly to call on its ally, the US government, to do the same.
Given the fact we are going to see these protests on Saturday, I know that you're helping to organise one in Perth.
Yeah.
Given that we are on occasions we see some people who are in the crowd who might be waving a very pretty much anti-Jewish, and I'm not saying anti-Zionist, but anti-Jewish, or saying death to America, death to Israel. Those kind of people who are involved often in this pro-Palestinian aspect, do you think that in many ways those people are not really helping the cause? Because it's the same way that you could be on the opposite side, you have those extreme elements in Israeli society and in the government who have been calling for the expulsion or the complete eradication of Palestinians. There's that kind of, in many ways, similar rhetoric and aspects. Can you understand what I'm saying?
Absolutely, and I would reject claims that Friends of Palestine WA and any of the groups, in fact, that are mobilising protests around Australia today are anti-Semitic. Friends of Palestine WA has, for its lifetime, nearly 20 years, specifically opposed all forms of racism, including anti-Semitism. Wherever we see it, we condemn it. And we've done so consistently at our demonstrations, and we've held more than 40 demonstrations in the last 16 months. We have marshals at the rally, which will ask anyone to leave who expresses anti-Jewish and anti-Semitic views, whether by placards or their chants, etc. And this has been the practice of demonstrations throughout the country over the last 16 months. The other point I'd make is anti-Semitism is real. It needs to be opposed. At the same time, we've seen it weaponised not just by the Dutton opposition, but by the Albanese government and by the Labor New South Wales government. The revelations we've seen about not just a hoax bomb threat in New South Wales, but also a series of attacks on places of worship and threats made against Jewish community leaders. We've seen this all revealed to be the act of criminal gangs, and I would challenge anybody that these acts have been carried out by protesters who attend mass peaceful street rallies in cities around the country. There's simply no evidence for it. If there were evidence for it, our members would have been arrested long ago and charged with such offences. So, I'd call on those who accuse us of anti-Semitism to show us the proof.
And so what's going to be happening on these rallies on the 22nd?
In Perth, we'll be gathering at Northbridge Piazza in the Perth CBD at 2 p.m. Western Standard Time tomorrow. We'll be marching through the streets of Northbridge in Perth following speakers, and our speaker lineup will include representatives from Friends of Palestine, from Students for Palestine, Jews for Palestine, who are a very active part of our movement, and a photographer, Georgia Mulholland, who has recently returned from the West Bank, and a representative from the Palestinian community. So we feel it's really important that people who are opposed to Israel's actions in Gaza take a public stand, join us for this peaceful rally, and we welcome everyone on that basis. And
Mr. Everett, what is the ultimate goal of Friends of Palestine in Western Australia? Because I know very much that the main objective, of course, is an independent Palestinian state with the two-party solution, though there have been other arguments instead for a one-party state, a three-party state. But the fact is that this is a issue that really has been going on for many, many decades, and to see what kind of proper peaceful solution could actually be not only attainable but justified for both the Israelis and the Palestinians themselves. So, what would you like to see as the best outcome if everyone decided to go down the full peaceful route?
Well, what the borders of future Palestinian state might look like is a matter to be resolved by Palestinians and Israelis, people who live in all of historic Palestine. But our view is that every Palestinian and Israeli should have equal rights. What we see at present is a situation where Palestinians are confined to enclaves or ghettos, what in fact some people have described as a mass open-air concentration camp in the case of Gaza. They are hemmed in with checkpoints. They have no freedom of movement, little opportunity for employment. They're denied access to roads, to water, aquifers, to resources that Israelis and Israeli settlers in the Palestinian territories simply take for granted. So our view is the current setup is apartheid. Israel is engaged in a process of colonisation that began since the State of Israel was declared in 1948. And we think this policy of military occupation, denial of rights, ethnic cleansing, colonisation should end, and there should be a solution in which Palestinians are able to return from the villages they were expelled in 1948 if they wish to do so, and should be able to live in peace alongside their neighbours, Jewish, Christian, otherwise. That's our overall objective. In terms of practically what we're seeking to achieve, though, with the demonstration tomorrow and with our current campaign, is a change in Australian government policy, whereby the Australian government, as I said, should condemn Israel's actions, sanction Israel, and bring pressure to bear on the State of Israel to accede to a peaceful solution.
Nick Everett, thank you very much for joining me.
You're welcome, Daniel. All the best.
US President Donald Trump is threatening to slap more tariffs on Australian imports, having already done so with steel and aluminium. Now our beef, agriculture, wine and even the pharmaceutical benefits scheme could be targeted. But the American president could have bitten off more than he can chew, as US businesses could also suffer, and Australia looks elsewhere among this trade war. Joining me from Sydney is Tim Harcourt, Industry Professor and Chief Economist at the Institute for Public Policy and Governance at the University of Technology, Sydney. Professor Harcourt, thank you very much for joining me on Firstline.
Yeah, my pleasure. Great to be with you.
Now, Professor, the situation between the United States and Australia is continuing to evolve. We know just hours ago, wine growers and wine producers in the United States are demanding that President Trump put tariffs on Australian wine imports. And this comes off the back of potential demands for our PBS as well as possibly our beef, agricultural sector. We already have the tariffs on steel and aluminium. This is quite a serious development between Australian and American relationships. What is your take so far on what Donald Trump is doing?
Well, I think we can, in some ways, blame Beijing for what Donald Trump is doing. As we all know, when Australia called for just a simple inquiry into the origins of COVID so there wouldn't be another pandemic, Beijing, the Chinese government, put tariffs on wine and barley and timber and other goods and services. And I guess that signaled to the world that you can put tariffs on when you're unhappy with someone politically, even though it's got nothing to do with economics. And in the same way that the Chinese government put tariffs on Australia, the Trump administration is doing the same thing, putting tariffs on for reasons of might be immigration, it might be fentanyl, or it might be no reason at all. But they've been given the sort of green light by Beijing to use tariffs as a geopolitical tool.
And this is turning into a full-blown trade war. We know the issues that are going on, not just between America and the United States and Australia, but also between Canada, the European Union, China, and there's the whole factor of what exactly is also being tied in with the war in Ukraine. We also have the Middle East at the moment. All these factors are certainly being tied in with one another. So if there's one sector is affected, another sector is inadvertently affected. At the moment, do you think that Donald Trump himself is deliberately trying to use this as a bizarre negotiation tactic? Because I think might be something he's also trying to do with NATO as well when it comes to defence spending.
Generally, his tactic is to put something on the table that is sort of kind of outrageous and then negotiates with you to take it off. That was sort of his modus operandi as a property developer. So that could be part of it, yes. But having said that, I mean, in a way, there's been a ceasefire in the trade war for a long time. But once one parts of it starts to unravel, you're right, it sort of clicks onto other parts of the geopolitical framework. And I mean, the EU's had protection since its inception. You know, you could, for the cost of the European agricultural subsidies, you could pay business class for all the French cows to fly around the world business class. You know what I mean? So yeah, we're in a sticky situation when it comes to the unraveling of a lot of the trade agreements.
And as you know, we're based up here in Tamworth, so one of our primary food bowl producers for Australia, and we have been exporting a lot to the United States after the Middle East market was reduced quite a lot, usually because of the live export bans. What is kind of the effects that you believe these tariffs could have on Australian food and beef exporters, especially here in the New England Northwest?
Well, it'd be very bad for New England and Australia. It'd be very bad for New England and America too. I mean, Americans consume a lot of Aussie beef. It's efficient, clean, high quality, and a good price. And so if you put tariffs on, well, that'll put the price up, become more expensive, and they'll have to substitute for inferior quality. So bad news for New England where you are, bad news for New England in the USA.
And it seems in many ways that a lot of Americans don't seem to really understand about what the tariffs actually mean, because in the election campaign, I did see more than a few people believe that the tariffs wouldn't actually affect them. They wouldn't be the ones paying for it directly or indirectly. It would be the people who would be exporting instead of those importing. And we know very well that there can be quite a few businesses who are looking at just bailing out of the United States because they don't want to deal with what's happening with the change in import exports, as well as the whole situation regarding Donald Trump's other policies too. They will literally go away to other businesses, just like what we saw with Brexit with the UK.
Yeah, people in this country don't understand the impacts of tariffs either. I mean, ultimately, it's like putting rocks in your own harbour, and you pay high prices, and often you protect industries in the short term, but in the long run, you actually really hurt them. And under the Hawke-Keating government, we removed a lot of our tariffs, and Australia had 30 years of economic prosperity and a lot of export industries that we didn't have before. So I've been trying to explain to people for years that tariffs are really bad. They never believe me. Now Donald Trump's brought them in because they don't like Donald Trump. They're starting to believe me. So it took Donald Trump to have them see the real truth about the impacts of tariffs.
And funnily enough, we've seen some of the changes already. We have this multi-billion-dollar deal with Canada for the exportation of this defense technology that has literally come out of nowhere. And we know that Canada has been dealing with the big brunt of Donald Trump's rhetoric. He keeps referring to, the 51st state being Canada, and he was referring to the now former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau as Governor Trudeau. But he seems not to have reckoned with the new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, who is really absolutely digging his heels in and is really going to show that Canada is not someone who is going to be pushed around by Donald Trump. What's your take on that?
Oh, it's a gift to Mark Carney. I mean, he's been made Prime Minister without actually having a seat in the House of Commons. He's a former central banker. And the Conservatives were going to Canadian Conservatives were going to paint him as a globalist who's more comfortable in Switzerland with his banker mates than Saskatoon, and with the farmers on the prairies. And he's been able to wrap himself with a maple leaf. He's been out playing hockey for the Edmonton Oilers, and he can just campaign against Trump. And may the moose be with you. He's set. He can campaign against Trump. He can campaign against Trudeau in a sense. He's very different, and it's a gift to him. He's got a chance of winning now.
And we look at the polls happening in Canada. The Liberals have closed that gap where pretty much they're only 1 or 2 points behind the Conservatives, or in fact in front. And the Canadian opposition leader has also come under a lot of pressure because he is more politically inclined towards Donald Trump. It looked like that he would be sailing in, but now he's really trying to fight for his political career because he was previously seen as more associated with Donald Trump. And then after all that's happened over the past couple of months, we could, as you just said, look like the possibility that the Liberals could have this miraculous electoral recovery. And that would be, of course, a massive middle finger towards Donald Trump if the Liberals not only win re-election, but they gain a majority in the House of Commons.
Yeah, I don't know if they're talking about a majority just yet, but they were definitely on the slide with Justin Trudeau. He'd been in there a long time. There are a lot of social issues in Canada, social cohesion, similar to Australia with the rise of anti-Semitism. There was some blowback out after COVID. There was a famous truckers blockade in Ottawa. There were a lot of issues that the Conservative alternative was able to make a lot of political capital on. But now he's facing Mark Carney, and of course he's got the impact of Donald Trump. So he'll probably also try and be very pro-Canadian and a free trader and campaign against Trump, but he hasn't got incumbency, so it's going to be a bit harder.
And Professor, how do you think next week's budget could also be impacted by the tariffs and the situation regarding not just our economic aspects, but our defence aspects as well? Because interestingly enough, the head of the Danish Defence Commission, Rasmus Jarlov, said yesterday on Twitter that buying from America is a security risk now, and Lockheed Martin was rushing to soothe any fears over security issues regarding American technology. What's your take on that?
I think the American technology companies and the people in the Defence Department are still pretty sound, so those relationships will continue. But it is a nervous time. I suspect with our budget, we'll have to factor in the cyclone impact of Alfred. We'll have to factor in the sort of anti-inflation agenda of Jim Chalmers. And you're correct. There'll be an increase in defence spending. We'll see that in the UK. We'll see that in Europe, as we've seen in Canada. So there'll have to be either some changes to taxes or some changes to social expenditure. So probably a good time to be the Defence Department in Australia. Probably not such a good time to be some of the social policy spending programs.
And finally, Professor, I know that this actually has not been a really good week for the coalition, with Peter Dutton making a few limp-wristed responses regarding involving Anthony Albanese, which has been taken as a very poor gay slur against Penny Wong and many members of the LGBTQI community. I was interested to see how the coalition has been reacting to what the federal government has been doing, and some of the Liberal and National MPs saying, if Peter Dutton was Prime Minister, he would be able to make a deal with Donald Trump. I personally have looking at that. I don't see how much Peter Dutton would have been able to change too much, especially it seems that a lot of these things seem to be shifting the goalpost a lot with whoever is a Labor or a coalition supporter or someone who likes Donald Trump or doesn't like Donald Trump. It looks like that regardless, we would have been stuck with a very difficult US president regardless. And I don't see how Peter Dutton himself, who is under enormous pressure over the past few weeks with his handling over what he would do with Donald Trump, as well as nuclear, as well as that slur that he made at the Lowy Institute. It doesn't really bode a lot of confidence from my perspective. What's your understanding of that?
think we'd said Albanese was soft on defence, so I think he would have made some traction because China, despite the reduction of tariffs, China has been circumventing the Australian coastline like Matthew Flinders. So I think he would have he'll probably just change his language on that because he probably thinks the Labor government's quite vulnerable on that issue. And I think what he'll do, I'm not his advisor, but I think what he'll do is he'll pick up some of the social policy of Donald Trump that's quite popular. And as you say, he'll eschew a lot of the trade policies. And you're probably right. I think a lot of prime ministers are unsure about how to handle Donald Trump. I don't think Malcolm Turnbull relished the opportunity of dealing with him. So I think it's a hard task for any future prime minister. So if anything, it's probably a neutral issue because both would find it pretty hard, I guess.
Professor Tim Harcourt, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Daniel. Appreciate it.
March 31st marks International Trans Day of Visibility, a time when members of the trans community across the world are continuing to fight for their rights just to exist. In the country music capital of Tamworth, the city's LGBTQI+ community are banding together for a special celebration of those who are trans on International Trans Day of Visibility. Earlier this week, I spoke to the President of Tamworth Pride, William Weller. I spoke to him not just about the upcoming event, but also about his own journey. Well, first, Will, thank you so much for joining Firstline. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here.
Now, we recently just had Mardi Gras. How was that? There was a lot of excitement and a lot more glitz and glamour for 2025, but that's from my observation. How did you find it?
Yeah, no, it was an amazing experience. It always is. And it's really amazing to hear the crowd like shouting out Tamworth and getting really excited about what we're actually bringing out. And we went a lot different in our costumes this year, and really went with a bold theme to try and represent what we've done in the community, what needs to still happen in the community, that kind of stuff. So it was really exciting to get that message out there and have it received so well.
Because a lot of this actually came from that massive amount of goodwill that happened with the Tamworth Pride Festival last year. When I was covering it for the news, I was just blown away by the crowd attendance, but also the diversity of seeing so many families, and I mean the kids loved the drag queens. They were blown away by the makeup and the costumes and all that. It was a huge event, and it really certainly blew away what I would expect.
Yeah, no, we worked really hard on that event, and I think we had a really good theme for that event this year with the superheroes by day, the villains by night. Everyone loves to dress up, and I think that really showed through the crowd. We had a lot of different outfits, a lot of different people wearing different superhero costumes and stuff, and I really enjoyed getting a chance to actually dress up as Batman for the day, so that was awesome. So and it again, like the messaging behind it was that you could be anything, you could you don't have to fit in any box. You can just be who you want to be, and that's what we want to give. We want people to feel that they can do in a place like Tamworth.
I know that this can be very personal, and my way of questioning is not supposed to be so probing, and you don't have to say too much if you don't want to. But I am, of course, curious about your own personal journey and through the LGBTQI+ community, because everyone who has to come out experiences it in a very different way. So first, what do you identify as?
So I identify as transgender and pansexual. So I've actually come out twice in my lifetime. So first off, came out as a lesbian quite a while back when I was in my 20s, and through some self reflection and discovery, realised that didn't really quite sit right with me, and then I just did a lot of, as I said, self-reflection, and realised that I actually aligned more with being trans, and that I'd always wanted to be a man, and and just needed to feel, I guess, that acceptance from other people to feel I could be comfortable to do that.
Part of the reason I've asked you is, and especially that you've said that you're a member also of the trans community, there is, of course, a lot of pressure upon the vast majority of members of the trans community, particularly those who are male to female transitioning. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious to know, what is it like to be a transgender man, if that's correct, in a place like Tamworth?
Well, I mean, honestly, trans men do find it easier to pass. So pass means that people don't generally look at you and go, you were a woman in the past. They see you as a man, and it's a lot easier because of the hormones and all that kind of stuff.
You're not clocked.
Yes. So it is a lot easier for us to walk through life without having people being able to see us as anything other than what we are as men. Whereas I think that trans women have a lot more difficulty with that. In saying that, though, there is a lot of ignorance, I guess, around trans men and what we're capable of as well. Like, you know, there's a lot of, well, trans men aren't threats to anyone because they'll never be as good as men, you know, they'll never be able to be as strong as men, all that kind of stuff. So there's still that as well. But I think that in my experience, I've seen a lot more hate towards trans women than there are to men.
Because it's generally, as you just said, it's easier to kind of tell. I mean, I've seen some photos. There's some very, very convincing trans women and very, very, very convincing trans men that you would not be able to tell apart from a I think the term cisgender, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
So that's quite impressive. And then, of course, funny enough, you got all these people these trans investigators on Twitter who believe that because there's this one little change that they think in a person, they think, oh no, they're trying to clock someone as being transgender when it could be just a completely regular cisgender person, and and there's that weird phase you can always tell, but many of these people you can't tell.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine what it must be like to be trans, and I know that there's various experiences or the thought or the logic behind why you're like this. What is it for you? I know one example is like right soul, wrong body, or like that kind of thing. How did you feel that you were trans?
I just never felt like I fit in anywhere. So every, I guess every path that I took, there was always just this feeling that I was out of step, that I wasn't quite in where I wanted to be. And no matter how happy I was in the relationships that I had, there was just always this feeling that something was off, that it wasn't right. And I think that's what made me keep going. I need to work on this. I need to figure out what this is. And I think that's a similar feeling that a lot of people who are trans that I've heard say, that it's not necessarily feeling that you're in the wrong body, but that you just don't necessarily belong as the way that you're portraying yourself at the time. So it's kind of a lot of masking, similar to what people with autism do, to try and fit into society. And I think that's a really difficult thing for people to deal with. So they have to, portray themselves as something that they're not throughout their life in order to try and fit in and not buck those conventions that everybody has lived with throughout their lives. So yeah, that's how it was for me.
And I can't imagine, especially as you were saying, like growing up and feeling that you're different in the term of the sexual spectrum, and you also have said you're pansexual. That was a term I remember when I watched an episode of Sex and the City as well. So what's pansexual for those who are unaware?
So I'm actually attracted to a person's personality, not necessarily their sex or gender. And for me, it's always been who a person is that's attracted to me to them, not not how they present. So yeah,
it's quite incredible, because as we know, there has been this constant discussion about we've had the controversial LGB movement, particularly in Britain, who have been trying to like push away from the trans aspect of the LGBTQI plus community. There's a lot of acronyms now.
Yes.
But we do know that at the very start, going all the way back to like Stonewall and even before, how the trans community, the trans aspect has been vital for the civil rights movement, for gay and lesbian rights. And I guess also being trans, you kind of straddle that divide of the male and female, and that makes you feel in some ways part of that community, but also you feel sometimes, if you feel very alone, if someone's trying to push back saying, no, we'd like, you're trans, that's not part of our community anymore. That must be very difficult.
Oh, absolutely. And I think like a lot of that comes from fear. All the LGBT, like people that are gay, lesbian, so forth, they've been through all of this before. They've been marginalised. They've had people wanting them dead. They've had, a lot of hate placed against them. And I think there's that fear of, being brought along with the trans community at the moment. And so that's where I think that comes from. But it is obviously very hurtful that, that trans people have always been a part of the human rights movement, that we've always been supportive of gay and lesbian people, and to have people be afraid to be a part of, or afraid for us to be a part of their community, is obviously very difficult for a lot of people. And I just think that there's just a lot of misunderstanding really on what trans people are, what they experience. There's not enough research out there really to be able to give a lot of answers to a lot of the misinformation people keep putting out there about our community.
And speaking of misinformation, very recently we had Clive Palmer make these ads in various newspapers, including the Newcastle Herald, which said there were only two genders. And this is, of course, one of the most confusing aspects, because some people don't seem to really understand the difference between sex and gender, or it's conflated to being both at the main time. When you saw those ads come through, what was going through your head? Because there was a lot of backlash against Clive Palmer and the newspapers for printing those ads.
Actually, I was completely disgusted by them, to be honest. It's one thing to have like beliefs in to not understand that kind of stuff, but to put it on a major newspaper, and also to have the ads on TV that he's had, especially aired at the times that they've been aired. They've generally been aired around 7 o'clock at night when kids are watching TV. There'd be a lot of vulnerable trans people seeing those ads and feeling like they're still having to continue to fight to be who they are, or feeling like it may not even be worth fighting to be who they are because of the backlash that's being spread against them. And I think, like, honestly, it's not really that difficult to understand. Like, gender is how you see yourself. Your sex is what you were born as, like, what your chromosomes, your DNA says. So it's all through history, through biology. Like, there's a lot of marine life that change sex dependent on what's, or change gender dependent on what they need, so it's not anything that's new, really. And I think that's the most important thing for people to realise, is that, trans people aren't new. They've been around for hundreds of years, but it's just that people are more comfortable to be able to express themselves as who they are now. They've got more language to be able to actually speak about who they are. And that's why it's become much more prevalent, I guess, in our society, because you've got so much more acceptance. People know exactly what they're feeling. They've got the medical community behind them, all of that kind of stuff that makes it much easier for people to examine their gender, examine themselves, and work out who they are.
And that's one of the biggest aspects of what exactly it means to be trans. I know that for some trans people, they have the terms like transmedicalism, of course, having the diagnosed body dysmorphia, and they say that trans is, without trying to be offensive as a mental illness, which some people could say, oh, we can cure that by making you not trans and all that. But in their case is that, no, I've got to diagnose medical illness which with a chemical imbalance in my brain, and the way for that cure is for me to transition. And of course you have some of the more extreme conservative or religious aspects of society who say all you're interested in is going after kids because apparently that you've got an agenda, the trans ideology and all that. But in many ways I'm looking at it and thinking I don't understand why they're saying it, because it's not like you're going out to people with a dart or something and you're trying to shoot kids with a dart, saying we've trans someone or something. That's it's in many ways it's similar to the old conspiracies against gays and lesbians. Oh, you're interested only in the kids. You're trying to recruit them. That kind of thing. It's a lot of. This is what I'm seeing. It's a lot of that similarities and that disparagedness that costs people's lives.
Absolutely. We've had, unfortunately, and even in the Tamworth community, we've had people die by suicide because of not feeling like they're accepted in society and not feeling like they can actually be their authentic selves in society. It's not just in major cities that people are feeling comfortable to come out. It's everywhere. The more that people feel comfortable to be who they are, the more likely they are to actually explore those parts about themselves and say, hey, I'm trans, hey, I'm gay, hey, I'm lesbian. It's society's changed to that point where people can feel comfortable to do those things, and I think unfortunately we as a species have always been afraid of difference, and so we've always demonized difference. Any difference a person had. I mean, like people with red hair, for example, were demonized. Women were demonized quite a long time ago. In the witch trials and things like that. Any of them that spoke up and said, I want to actually have something different in my lives than what you're telling me I have to do, were demonized. So I think that is where all of this comes from, is that people are seeing a difference. They're not comfortable with that difference. They don't understand that difference. And I think the more understanding that our community and the world has in regards to trans people and where it comes from, why it's happening, all those kind of things, the more people accept it, and it won't be as big of a thing as it is now.
And part of the things that I've been doing over the past couple of years, I think there's to a certain degree a bit of confusion or like a bit of uncertainty when you're bringing out, I think where part of it came from, when you have there's so many different genders coming out. And I think it's ranged, of course it used to be he, him, she, her. Then you had the non-binary aspects, which is they, them, which I think starts to confuse people. And then you've got aspects like neutroids and two-spirit, which I know it comes from like Native Americans. Yeah. And then you have other aspects like demisexual. All these different terms come in, and it can be very difficult for people to really think, okay, what does this mean? This feels like something that's coming out of Tumblr, where of course infamously so many people, when they had Tumblr, when it used to be big, you say I'm poly, bi, neutroids, and you're thinking like, are you like what exactly do you mean like that? Can you understand where I'm coming from?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that again comes along with that language. People have more language to be able to describe how they feel about things. I recently last year did a translating course with Equality Australia, and I met a lady that described herself as Fa'afafini from Samoan culture, and was able to hear about her culture and how how they'd been involved in that culture for quite a long time, and actually people who were identified as Fa'afafini were revered in that culture. And the same is, I did meet a young Indigenous woman as well at that translating, and she spoke about the fact that her different Indigenous cultures approach gender in different ways.
Sister girls, brother boys.
Yeah, sister girls, brother boys. Some of them approach it in different ways, and that she was just allowed to explore who she was, and she actually sorry, I have probably referred to her incorrectly because she is non-binary, but
it can be a bit confusing, as you can see, because it's sometimes not very. It's a bit hard when trying to get those pronouns, and because it just I mean, I can certainly understand sometimes if you see a person who says they're non-binary but they look female or male, it's like sometimes innocently we just say he, she, or something instead of they, them, because you can use they, them in the singular pronoun if you don't know what this person looks like. What did they say? What do they do and all that? But sometimes it can be a bit hard to adjust. And usually it's that people don't want to offend or anything, but it can be a little bit confusing, when you look at the visual aspect too.
Absolutely. And if you talk to any non-binary or trans person, so long as you try, that's all they really care about. They don't really want you to be 100% right every single time. But if you pick yourself up and go, oops, I probably shouldn't have said that, and sorry, they'll be like, hey, that's fine. So long as you're giving it a go, that's all we care about. And I think pronouns are a hot topic. People, they do get confused by the whole they, being able to refer to someone as they.
Or Ziza. There's a couple of them, and there's a lot of that. And because it's so new, a lot of people just don't really seem to understand. Then, of course, you've got the jokes. I identify as an attack helicopter, or I identify as a desk, or that kind of thing that has been spouted, usually from right-wing conservatives who aren't trying to really understand what a person is feeling with and all that. And I understand in a way, because we've had this controversy over transgender athletes and all that, also what is the definition of a man and a woman and all that this is in some ways a very touchy subject, but a lot of it I have noticed when someone asks what's the definition of a woman, it's usually more of a malicious question. There's with bad intentions rather than actually saying what is a man, what is a... I mean, I know Jermaine Greer would refer to you as a lost lesbian.
Yes, most likely. Yeah. And to be honest, when I actually was a lesbian, I was a part of the Butch Femme scene, which is women who are more masculine, who are attracted to women who are more feminine. And there was a lot of concern from that community about losing lesbians to the transgender ideology at the time, and without having any actual information or anything to educate myself with, it's very easy to get swept along with that kind of stuff and go, no, we don't want to lose our lesbians. We don't want people, we don't want people feeling like they have to become a man in order to be able to feel the way that they are. And then being able to see it from the side that I now see things, having been a lesbian and now being a trans man, I can see that, that my thought processes in that time were completely incorrect, and that the trans men that have become trans men after being lesbians were always trans men. They were never ever lesbians at the time. They were trans men, but they just didn't have either the ability to become what they wanted to be able to become, or the support to become what they wanted to become, or the language to be able to describe what they felt. They had always been working towards becoming a man, and that's, for me, how I felt, that I was always walking that road towards, or that journey to become the man that I am today. And it took different experiences to get me there. And I think that's probably the same for other people.
Are you happy?
Absolutely. I'm the happiest I've ever been. Being able to, this is probably a bit of a personal bit, but I had chest surgery in 2021, and when the first time I looked at myself in the mirror after that surgery and saw my chest, I felt whole for the first time in my life. And ever since then, my confidence in myself, my ability to be able to be a leader, for example. I don't think I would ever have become president of Tamworth Pride if I hadn't actually taken that step and that journey, because I wouldn't have had that confidence to be able to be that kind of leader in my community. And so I think that everyone has the right to be able to feel whole, to be able to be the person that they want to be, whether or not people understand it or not. We all have the right to be able to explore our journey and explore who we are, and there shouldn't be anything that stops us from being able to do that.
So March 31st, International Trans Day of Visibility. This has been going on since 2019, and we know the previous US president, Joe Biden, when he made quite a big speech about the acceptance of trans people on International Trans Day of Visibility. We don't think that the current US president will be as more inclined, but here in Tamworth you are going to be organising something very special. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so we've partnered with Tamworth Regional Gallery. They've always been very supportive of events that we've wanted to do. So we're going to be having a lights out dance party towards the end of the event. We've got a photographer, Danny Dalton, who is part of our community, one of our committee members, who's going to take portraits of people holding a pride flag that they identify with, that we may use for a future exhibition. And we've got Missy Sparkles, who's a transgender drag queen. She's the only one in Tamworth.
What a name.
Yes. And she's going to do some performances for us on the night as well. And then we also have Jack Pallett, who is a trans DJ in Tamworth, who's going to be doing our lights out party for us.
That is quite impressive, and it's all ages, because I saw some of the questions that were posted onto Facebook, so kids will be there. Naturally, there will be some people saying, like, is this age appropriate for kids, or what would they expect? I wouldn't exactly be expecting any type of strip show or any crazy stuff like that. Yep. But is this also an opportunity for those who might be, because we know that some kids are now starting to come out younger and younger because they see more of it in the media, or they start to feel more comfortable that they would be able to do it. What can some of the kids expect if they were there?
Yeah, obviously, we're going to have some speakers as well. So there'll be stories from from people like Di Harris, one of our previous president, who was also a transgender woman. We're actually having a guest from my trans leading course come up. Her name's Jasmine. She's another trans woman and has lived in Tamworth for a while and then moved to Newcastle, and then her experiences being, coming from a regional town and then going to a big city. We're going to have some young people as well involved in things. So Jack's quite young. Missy's also quite young. And the entertainment is going to be appropriate for all ages. So the lights out dance party is basically a chance for people to dance as though no one can see them. We'll have some glow sticks and stuff like that, so no one runs into each other. But but a chance for people to be able to. One of the biggest things I think you find when you go onto a dance floor is you've got so many eyes on you, and you don't really feel comfortable to be able to just dance to the music how you want to dance to the music. And so turning the lights off allows people to just get out there, do whatever moves they want to, and not have to worry about someone watching them and feeling self-conscious. So.
Reminds me a bit of those silent discos. Yeah, you see people dancing about in complete silence, and then you've got the headphones on, so it's quite something. Yeah. And I know that if we just get back a little bit political, we've got the upcoming federal election. Yeah. What issues would you like to be debated or addressed, whoever wins power, whenever that election is held?
Well, obviously, in a personal note, transgender healthcare. It's extremely expensive for trans people to transition, especially surgically.
Especially out here in regional areas too.
Absolutely. It cost me $15,000 to have my chest surgery, and none of that was covered. Majority of that was not covered by Medicare or by private health insurance. So it's an extremely expensive undertaking, which then means that some people have to choose not to do those things, even though that would actually help them be able to feel more comfortable to be themselves. I mean, I know with my experience, you know, how I felt after having that surgery, and I wouldn't have been able to do that without the generous support of some friends. But you know, people are having to fundraise in order to be able to get those surgeries done. So transgender healthcare, definitely. I mean, even testosterone, it's about $120 every 3 months. You know, for some people, they wouldn't be able to afford that. Estrogen would be very similar, and you know, the surgeries involved in transitioning from female. Sorry, the other way, from male to female.
Yeah, it's always hard sometimes.
Yeah. They're just as expensive. I know that bottom surgery for a male is upwards of $50,000 to $60,000, and there's only 2 surgeons in Australia that do it, and that's why it's so expensive.
And a lot of people will say, "Oh, you're not going to," because a lot of people then start to get very interested and in a very creepy way about a person's genitals. So, like, so male to female, you're not like you can't birth children, so therefore you're not a woman. I would imagine it would be like you would face the same issues as a trans man, saying, "Oh, like even if you got bottom surgery, you'll never have a proper penis. It's just a piss hole."
Yeah, exactly. You know, and you know, that's one of the uncomfortable things for me being a trans man, is being in, you know, male toilets, and you know, having that fear about, you know, what people are thinking, you know, needing to, you know, sit down on a toilet. Most people don't sit down on toilets if you're a male, that kind of thing. So, you know, there is still that dysphoria when you're unable to access those kind of things, and $50,000 to $60,000 to get something like that done is out of the league for generally most people. That's a deposit on a house, pretty much. So, you know, so that's definitely something that I'd love for them to do, is to put more of trans healthcare into Medicare, and be funded better with private health insurance. But again, like, you know, we've had self-ID, thankfully, just get passed in New South Wales, but I'd love for that to be federally protected as well. So that way, you know, people aren't fearing that if, you know, if a different party gets in a state election, that they'll repeal that. So, you know, we shouldn't really have people sitting there going, is my rights that I have now going to be dependent on the party that gets in? That should never be happening to anybody, regardless of how they identify. So that's definitely something that I'd be hoping that they would do. You know, and just ensuring that people are unable to be discriminated against for who they are. So we unfortunately had the discrimination bill that came in and was quite deflated, so there's quite a lot of it was removed in order to be able to satisfy different parties so that it could actually get through. But protections for LGBTQIA plus people were left out of that. So there was the anti-vilification laws that they were trying to get passed that got left out of that bill, which would have been very good for people who have experienced that in their lives. So there's a lot that they could be doing definitely for our community, not just for the trans community, but also for the rest of the LGBTQIA plus community as well.
And if you don't mind me saying, of course, at Mardi Gras, you had a very special moment that you reported on. Do you want to tell us about it?
Yeah, I proposed to my partner at Mardi Gras. I got down on one knee in the middle of Moore Park and proposed to her, and completely forgot everything that I wanted to say to her because she started crying straight away. And once I was on that knee and I had the ring in my hand, I was like, what do I say? What do I say now? But I just, you know, asked her to marry me, and she said yes, and so we are engaged.
Congratulations. It's a beautiful moment. And one incredibly important question. Mm-hmm. Are you a fan of RuPaul's Drag Race?
I actually don't watch it very often, unfortunately. Mostly because I'm not a very big fan of drama, unfortunately, so especially manufactured drama.
Pretty sure 90% of it's all fake stuff.
I'm sure it is too. I've been around enough drag queens in my life to know the amount of drama that comes out of that world. But yeah, no, if I had more time, I probably would watch it. But you know, unfortunately, at the moment, like, life is just so busy. So yeah.
William, thank you so much for joining us, and congratulations.
Thank you so much.
And that's First Line for now. I'm Daniel Pizarro. Thank you so much for your company. Have a great weekend, and I'll see you next time. Good evening.